Hello and welcome to Fog, everyone. This is Red Stain Radio, a Dead by Daylight podcast. I am one of your hosts, Bryson, and I'm joined by Stevie,
Hi.
Maddie,
Yo, yo.
and Bun.
Hi.
Thank you all for being here. How's everyone doing? Are we surviving the heat wave? I know I had.
It's back.
Yeah, it's back. It's pretty rough out here. My AC went out the other day, and so we've been struggling with that, but we're gonna get through it. Yeah. How's everyone else doing?
Canada right now, or at least the area I'm in, we've had pretty muggy weather and it's been raining and thundering for most of the day. So honestly, I love rain and thunder, so
Same.
awesome. But it's gonna be like that for the rest of the week, so maybe not so slay.
Raining
No,
weather is
not
the
at all.
best.
Burning in hell right now. Just muggy and rainy today, so
Oh man.
it's been fine. I'm just inside building furniture.
Ooh.
Oh, the fun perks of after moving. I love that with all the Allen wrenches and such.
Yup.
Cool. Well, this is episode 3. We're going to be diving into some lore, but first we have some housekeeping to cover. We covered this in the last episode, but the Grimoire is the voting for the next year's anniversary chapter. Voting is open every 2 weeks, so keep your eye out on in-game messages and DBD socials, so you can keep an eye out for when it opens again later this week when this episode comes out. I think it'll open this weekend. In addition, we have the community cosmetic contest is live. You can submit your cosmetics up till July 24th. Be sure to check out the rules and restrictions before submitting. They restrict it to certain countries and regions, and you cannot submit, or they will not accept, or they won't vote for or accept submissions for the winners from last year. So no Sable, Unknown, Jake, Singularity, Adam, or Dredge. We got really amazing cosmetics from last year that we'll be getting in the next couple tomes. Looking forward to those. In addition, as the day of recording, they revealed the 9.1 update, including the Walking Dead teases. We'll be discussing that in next week's episode because right now the BTB isn't out and we really don't know anything about the new survivors that are coming. So we're going to wait, get our hands on them in the BTB, and then discuss them later. And yeah, we'll go from there. And then finally, we got a listener question, Cheese question. Thank you so much for reaching out. You asked, will you rank killers? We will, but not in the way you may want us to. So anytime you can look up a Google search and find a power ranking for all the killers, you can find a dime a dozen and even more than that. We probably won't do that unless people maybe really, really want it, but probably won't. And then what we'll do instead is like do a kind of our own unique spin on a tier list. So it might be something funny or witty or kind of goofy, and we'll all kind of create our own and come up with an episode around that idea. So that answers your question. But thank you for sending us in a question. And speaking of questions, we'd love to hear from the rest of you. Send us in questions, comments, or feedback by sending us an email at redstainradio@gmail.com. And you can stay up to date on the latest episodes by following us on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. Be sure to follow us in those places, and you can leave us a review or comment on the podcast platform of your choice. Thank you so much for listening, and let's just jump into it. The lore of Dead by Daylight. You know, it's an asymmetrical horror multiplayer game. When new people are jumping in, they're going to be like, oh, we're just playing a glorified hide and seek or tag or whatnot. Like, there's no lore to this video game. But there is. There's actually quite a lot of lore in this video game. It's kind of crazy. And so before we jump into any of the lore, discussing it, I kind of want to get everyone's gauge on where they stand in terms of, are you an expert, like on a scale of 1 to 10? Are you, a 10, you know everything, or is there stuff to be? So I'll jump to Stevie, you first. Where you stand in terms of your knowledge on DBD lore?
Let's give it a 7. I'll give it a 7.
Okay.
I definitely think I know more than I do, but like I haven't dug into like the most accessible amount of the lore. I haven't gone into the tomes. The tomes are all, as of the current patch, free for anyone to look at. They're kind of hidden at the under your main menu at the very bottom, but it is now fully unlocked. All the lore pages are totally there. So if anyone's a lore fiend, dive into it right now. Pause this, go boot up Dead by Daylight, look at 6 hours of lore cutscenes that are just there for you to look at. However,
go ahead.
yeah, I just freewheel it, right? I read the little blurbs when a new killer comes out. I like looking at their teasers. I like hearing about what the new realms are supposed to be based in. But I haven't poured through everything. they've given. So I'm at like a solid 7.
Awesome. And Maddie?
I'd say I'm like an 8 or a 9. I really like Dead by Daylight's lore, especially the original content, just because I feel like they take a lot of common horror tropes and like put a like, twist on it. And even the entity itself, which is like this cosmic entity, which we'll cover later in the episode, don't worry guys, is pretty unique in the way they did it. And I also like some of the things they said, which we'll also cover later. And I also just love reading about horror and experiencing it because it's one of my favorite mediums or genres, I should say. So, yeah, I read a lot of the stories for the Killers and Survivors when they come out. I love to watch little YouTube essays about it. I love reading the tomes when I'm bored. And yeah, I'm a little unhealthy about it.
Not at all. It'll come in handy in this episode. And Bun?
Hell yeah.
I'd say I'm probably about a 7 as well. Maybe a few years ago when I was super hyper fixated playing as many hours a day as I could, I'd probably like slap myself at a full 10. But things have changed. I've been playing more on and off lately. So I've gotten behind in a few things, but I try to keep up with the characters at least. I let myself get pretty familiar with the characters, in particular.
Awesome. I'm so glad you all are kind of on the upper side of the scale because I am not.
What do you say?
I'm probably down below a 5 for sure, probably around a 3. Like I know
Oh,
basic surface level things, like I know, and that was
we're gonna
before.
be teaching you a
Yeah,
thing
we'll be
this
we'll be learning a
episode.
lot. I
Okay.
know. And
Ask questions.
I absolutely. I have questions here in our doc that I'll be covering, but I just want to. So if anyone out there is listening and you're very new to this, I guess I'll be kind of your window into this. Like I have questions about this. I did some research prior to this, so I know a little bit more, but I still don't think I'm confident. I know again the service level stuff, the setting. I know about the entity. I know why it's doing what it is and such. So yeah, I'm very much a noob when it comes to this lore, but I do think it's really interesting, and I'm excited to get into it. So this is something I'm very very much looking forward to. With that, I kind of broke down this, and we can jump around a little bit, but I mainly wanted to cover 4 main things here at the start, and then we can really dive into some meatier stuff because I know there's a lot of run-on plots and threads that we can kind of deepen ourselves into, but we mainly want to cover the gist here, and then in future episodes we can definitely dive into specific characters or even plot lines and such as that. So I kind of broke this down in 4 major parts: the trials, the entity, the survivors, and the killers. Based on y'all's kind of experience, where do we think the best place to start is? Should we start with the entity, considering it is kind of the puppet master of all of this? What do you all think?
I was gonna say, yeah, I feel like the entity is the first place we should start because it kind of ties into everything else. So
Awesome.
Yeah,
I say,
having a greater or like at least a basic understanding of the universe, and if you think about it, the entity's kind of the universe itself that we're taking place in. So having a basic understanding of the entity and the world that they're into, I think it's pretty important to understand everything else.
You're alluding to a lot right there, Bun, that I really like referencing. It's the world. It's the world of the entity, right? We're not on Earth anymore. These are humans. These are killers that are once people, but because everything is so different, because people are powered up and the rules are changed, it's because we're in the entity's world, universe, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. So we'll start there, and I'll give my basic understanding, and I'll kind of let you all build on top of it, and from there I can ask questions, and we can discuss as such. So to me, from what I've read and from what I understood, just generally, is the entity is essentially an emotions vampire. I think is what I read somewhere. It feeds off the emotions of both killers and survivors, and it puts them through these trials, which are the matches we are physically playing. And it feeds off the emotions that appear throughout that. So hope, the loss of hope, anxiety, anger, fear, and any of that. And it just repeats that over and over. And the killers do that bidding, and the survivors are kind of those victims. So that's kind of my understanding of it. I don't know who wants to jump in first. Maybe Maddie, you wanna go first and kind of elaborate on that.
Sure. So the entity basically, as you said, is like a vampire feeding on emotions. Specifically, it's some kind of unknowable cosmic entity that we can't really explain or ever understand truly. It is more than a god, but it's not quite living in the same way. I guess the easiest way to say it is kind of what Stevie was alluding to earlier, is that it's kind of a world, like its own universe, because the entity has complete control whatever enters its domain, whether that be someone choosing to enter or pull someone in, and has complete control over this. And the entity does this because it needs to eat, it needs to survive. How does it eat? On people's emotions. The more intense they are, the more it fuels it. And what are some of the easiest emotions to get intense? Fear, anger, sadness. And the more happier emotions aren't really as much. But stuff like hope, that also feeds the entity really well. So the entity sort of takes people from wherever and puts it into its realm and puts it into these trials because it found it's the most optimal way to get this emotional, like these emotions to feed it.
Yeah. So does the entity is there anything else like the entity? Does it have do we know where it originates? Does it have a home world? I don't know if that's an accurate question to ask.
No, it's all good, but I guess the easiest way to answer it is we don't know, and we will probably never know because the developers, at least at one point, have said that they want the entity to be truly unknowable because the unknown is a lot scarier when you don't know what it is. If we knew it was like a baby alien from an alien civilization and now it's angry, it's not as scary. But if we don't know why it does its things besides eating, why does it do it specifically like this? What does it look like? It puts a lot more fear into the players, but also the characters in the universe because you can never truly understand it. And just to wrap around back to your question, the unknown, as far as we know, there might be other beings like it, but not as powerful.
Yeah.
Or
Okay.
the entity itself.
I'd
Yes.
also I'd also like to say a little theory on that. I don't think it has a home world. I
Hmm.
do know that we have had lore that implies or outright states that it has destroyed entire like worlds and universes, and that's why it keeps having to move on to new ones.
Okay.
Hmm.
Okay.
That's
So
interesting.
it is a pretty big being, I guess, in quotation marks. Not one that I think would fit as a little babby alien on any planet.
No.
True.
No.
True. Stevie,
I
did you want
like
to add
to
something?
think of it it's kind of like a parallel universe in that everything in the fog, or fog being synonymous with like what the entity can touch. Anything the entity has fully touched, it kind of consumes. It feeds on like the emotions in a place, a person, or like an object, or a memory, or emotion. Anything it can grab, really, like it pulls. So we see sometimes a character will invite the entity into their world through like ritual or through just happenstance or trauma. These things will pull the entity through whatever's keeping it out, and it will. Like, I like the words that they use in the lore where it's called the bleed, where people who kind of study the entity or the Tory Kane's cultists, they call it the bleed, where like there's this wound in our world and the entity spills out of it, like it just kind of flows almost like water, like it's not really intending to do what it does, but it was designed, it was made, it was just meant to do this. It was meant to creep and like pour into these cracks we don't look at and don't think about.
Yeah.
I like that, where it
What a
kind
cool
of
name too, the bleed.
feeds into us.
Yeah, that's another thing I wanted to get into. So the entity pulls from a bunch of different universes, I guess we could say. So essentially, and it consumes worlds, with emotion and consuming off those emotions. So it's in a way, it's almost like Galactus, like consuming and collapsing those worlds to feed and move on to the next. I did read that it can penetrate worlds via by corrupting kind of those individuals, like such as the killers that we have in the game, kind of adding things to them so that they become corrupt and kind of evil, and then the survivors are kind of caught up in those areas where that kind of bleed happens that you were talking about, Stevie. Is that correct? Am I right in that rough estimate? Does anyone want to correct me? You're more than welcome to.
I would say for the most part that's pretty much right. Though I wouldn't say it's like Galacticus, because Galacticus is a bit more. It has more of a personality where he's like,
Yeah,
oh, I want to do
true.
this, I want to do that. Where the entity is more just, I need to feed. This is what I want. We don't know why.
Okay.
So for the most part, yeah, that is correct. It's just the entity is less personal and is more just something ununderstandable. There's a word for that. Does anyone know
Yeah,
that
it's
word?
given less characterization, but I'd say like in a similar way where like the Bible characterizes hell, where like there's different parts working all together against each other simultaneously, and they all make up one thing. The entity has like the trials going on. It has like its tendrils that it pokes through into our world that it grabs people with. It has like probably secret caves in itself that it uses to form killers into more brutish beings. It has different places to lock survivors until they're super broken or hopeful. It's got the void where you go when you're totally done with it and it can't do anything with you, and it just kind of freezes you in this blue hell where everyone hates blue and everyone hates blue there. God, I love blue.
Okay. Okay. And so, yeah, like you mentioned, the entity kind of appears in physical manifestations in the trials via the spider-like claws that appear when you're on the second hook stage or the third hook stage. Also through like corrupt intervention or thrilling tremors that covers the gens and kind of other situations like 2v8 cages and whatnot. So that, or is that the only physical manifestation we have of
That's
entity?
probably the most like coalesced form of the entity. You know how like you're about to be sacrificed and all of the tendrils start forming out of the air. They've been creeping up on you now, but now they're fully opaque. They're all there and they're trying to rip through your flesh. They're not just blocking your generator or, you know, sticking out of the window vault. Now you can't walk it. They're trying to kill you. They're actively like trying to digest you. That's the most it can do. I think like it has different forms, and the most free form is the fog itself. The fog you see around the trials obscuring your vision is part of the entity. The walls you see, those are part of the entity. The air you're breathing, that's the entity. It's every cell, it's every atom.
The entity needs to get a little away from me. I don't like how close it's getting.
It's in you. It's in your blood now that you're here.
Yeah, no, not a fan. No, thank you, entity.
And one thing I did read, and I don't know how, I don't want to go super into this, but I read that the entity is made up of auric cells, which are like the matter that make up with it, which I think
Right?
is really cool,
Maybe.
considering that is the premium currency we have in DVD, which I think is hilarious. But like that's what the matter that makes up the entity, which I thought was awesome. Like I saw that, it was like a revelation to me. It was like the doors were open when I watched that video. And I did some reading as well, but like it was, my mind exploded. Like, what? That's insane.
I don't want to pull an actually.
Oh, okay, that's
Do
okay.
it, do
So
it,
maybe
do
I'm
it,
wrong.
do it. No, y'all are all jumping at the actually. I want to hear it.
Actually. The auric cell, the entity isn't made of auric cells. It might be parts of it, but it isn't entirely made.
Okay.
Auric cells are sort of like building blocks for the entity's realm. So like when it designs a realm or a map, the auric cells come together to make them into the things that we see in the trials, like palettes or the walls,
okay.
the doors, etc. So it is kind of technically made of auric cells, but it's also not.
Okay, that makes sense.
I believe the fog is also called like an auric fog. So the fog is a bit of a manifestation of that power too.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that's a good coverage on the entity, just kind of top level, and maybe even we went deeper than I thought we would, but that's great. Let's jump into the survivors. Like we said, the entity feeds off of those emotions that they feel when they die or if they escape a trial. Either one, they appear back at the campfire, which is like a sub realm of the entity, from what I understand. And supposedly, Bun and I were talking this before the podcast. I had some questions. From what I've read, and there have been retcons and such, as you all have said, survivors' memories are wiped after each trial, which for me I have a bit of a problem with mechanically, because then how do they learn perks? You know, you can learn perks from other survivors. I would imagine that's done over the campfire, right, before a trial. That them being wiped just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I'm sure that's been retcon. Maybe that was an early edition. I don't know. But Bun, I'll jump to you first because we were talking about this before. You want to dive a little bit more into that?
Yeah, sure. So in the early days of DBD, and honestly, a few years into it, I think the lore was really basic. I don't think they expected people to get as invested into that aspect of the game. And that's why it took so long to have like tomes and lore pieces and everything like that. So I really don't think that they were really putting a lot of substance into it. They weren't, putting like any like groundbreaking revelations or ideas into the lore that they were creating. And I think they were just making up things on the spot, honestly, for a lot of it.
Yeah.
Even if you go like to the original survivors and killers, like the lore release for them is just it's very basic. But I do think that the memory wipes were something that was introduced pretty early, just to explain like this is how like they don't like remember the killer, they don't know who betrayed them in the trial, none of that stuff matters, stuff like that. I don't think there's any like official retconning of that. I think it's one of those things they kind of just swept away under the rug and pretended they never said. Because I don't think it's been addressed in a long time, and I don't think it's something that suits the universe, especially since now we do, in the form of tomes, have evidence that a lot of the old survivors, the ones who have now gone into the void, they had to have held those memories. They had to have learned that there's a hopelessness to everything that they're doing. So I really think it's something they swept under the rug and just hope to God nobody remembers.
They're like, oh God, our emo phase. We were so edgy, and we were like, oh, and they would have to relive the trauma all over again because they don't remember. Ah.
Yeah, exactly.
I also just find it so much more riveting when survivors are there after a trial. Maybe a Meg did fuck over a Claudette or something, and they kind of spat it out after at the campfire. I find that level of interaction also compelling, and man, I would love to see kind of those interactions a little bit more. I'm sure there's some in the lore, but I don't know. I would love to experience that a little bit more elsewhere. But we can discuss that another time. But Maddie or Stevie, would you like to add to the survivor aspect of the trials? Maybe the memory wipes, or even beyond that.
I think it's very pick and choose. If you escape a trial and you learned that the survivor canonically learned how the trial works, it makes no sense for them to like lose that memory. I think the entity kind of gives you a gift in your memories. Whatever you remember from before you got sucked in is what they chose to let you have. The entity sort of recreates you when it sucks you in and when it kind of pulls you into every trial. Because if you're dying and be consumed, I think it has full control over you. I think it can spit you back out in just the way it wants, and it's on you to be broken by yourself. It'll keep bringing you back in the form it wants you, whether that's how cruel this is and you can feed it better, or you have no idea what's happening and your fear is what drives it. I think a moment to moment, like the Cheryl Mason has no clue in between every trial what's happening, but like the Adam Francis, he's got a bunch of these memories. He knows, I think certain survivors are given more memories.
Yeah, especially since there's a mark that goes on certain survivors and killers. I know this was introduced as more powerful beings were introduced, where people would start saying, well, hey, how is Pinhead trapped here? How is Pyramid Head trapped here? How's Cheryl trapped here? Because deceivingly, Cheryl is pretty powerful.
Yes.
And that's why one of her perks is literally controlling a piece of the entity. A bunch of these survivors and killers got little marks on them that kind of restrains their power, and that might contribute to like loss of memory.
I think okay, this is another actually, I'm so sorry.
No, you're good.
All good.
Actually, I believe the only character we have 100% confirmation that has a mark of negation is Vecna, which you can see on the back of his neck. It has like the little loading symbol. Every other survivor and killer, I think, either has an in-lore explanation or it's just kind of left for the players and readers to assume. I think for characters like Cheryl, it was just the entity being like, you can't do that. I'm not allowing you to do that. And then when you look in their perks, they have like little control to fight back with the entity, where Cheryl has that one perk where she can actually control the entity to have a generator blocked. Which
Yeah.
is
Oh,
weird
sorry.
though, because I was just gonna say, which is weird though, because she can teach that to other people. Is she teaching like Eldritch magic? Question mark.
It's easier to believe that David King is teaching you how to throw a punch.
Yes.
Yes.
Do the does the new prestige system still call them teachable perks, or do you just unlock the perk at level 1? Because they used to be teachable perks, and that was the
Yeah.
implication was you had to unlock the teachable version of the perk. It was a separate rarity. It was an orange perk that showed up on your web for anyone new to the game, and the orange perk was called the teachable perk, and that's what unlocked that one. Not even at level 1, but at like a just into the blood web pool for every other survivor killer. I don't know if they really removed the teachable as no, nobody is really talking with each other outside of the trials. No, they aren't really having a tea party where David King shows everyone what Dead Hard does.
Whoa.
It's interesting. I thought it added a little flavor, but I guess it was a little bit they didn't want to dive into, so they did sweep it under.
Yeah, maybe we'll see them elaborate or maybe even kind of clear up some of that confusion maybe later on. But I wanted to jump in that since we brought up killers. How does the entity choose killers? Like you mentioned, Bun, or Maddie maybe mentioned this. The Lich, Vecna, has that mark on his back because he's too powerful, so the entity kind of just nerfs him. Which is interesting considering the entity would bring someone in that could potentially best it itself. So, Maddie, I'll jump with you. How does the entity choose its killers? Is it kind of willy-nilly? Is it based off emotions, like it feeds off them? Is it a little bit of both? Go for it.
I think it's a bit of both, but I would say mainly it tries to find people who the entity thinks could provide it a lot of emotion, whether that be causing it or the character themselves cause it. Let's take Ken Kaneki, for example, from Tokyo Ghoul. When the entity takes him, he's already have been turned into a ghoul, which is a monster that can only feed on human remains or coffee. Everything else tastes awful to them, and they can't eat. And when the entity found him, he was being tortured in 100, like 90 something plus ways. I think it's 96, 97. And he was starving. And when he put him in the trials, it's very evident that Ken Kaneki has been kind of starved. So the entity has all of this like manipulation tactics to make certain characters act the way they want, specifically for killers. Another example of this would be characters like Spirit, where in her lore, the entity was coming for her father, who actually killed her and her mother. However, after it sensed the rage inside of Rin, which is the name of the spirit, by the way, it decided to take her instead and made a deal to allow her to live, but to exact her revenge. So the entity mainly goes for killers who will not only cause a lot of emotion, but have a lot of emotions themselves. Specifically if they're like very negative. Because, it wants to eat. It wants to get that yummy yum.
Can I add
Another-
to this too?
Yes, go ahead.
I do remember that there is lore about when the entity arrives in a world. I think we talked about like how it needs to sort of overlap and it needs to, claw its way into that world. I remember there being some lore about how it actually influences the living world before it is coming into its own realms, and it bleeds out into the, like our normal human world. It inspires people to do great acts of violence, not just on their own, but it actually corrupts their minds before they're ever in the entity's realm.
Hmm.
There's a few instances of it, and I think a lot of the cult stuff and a lot of the stuff with Elodie and Felix's parents had to do with it, where the influence is in their world. It exists there. They can feel it all around them, and it is making people do things that they wouldn't ordinarily do. And if they do a good job, boom, you got a killer.
Yes. And then the entity's like rubbing its little claw tentacle things like, yes, yes, join me, bestie, in my realm. I promise you won't be tortured
Seasoning
for
its meat
eternity.
before it
We're
cooks it.
having a slumber party.
Yes.
Stevie, were you gonna say something?
No, just that's what the entity does. It prepares its meals. It likes to figure out and poke the waters before it dives in. It doesn't want a bad meal. It wants to get somebody who would feed off of the emotions it can provide.
Yeah, and to build on what Bun said earlier, we can kind of see this with characters like the Spirit's dad and Skull Merchant's dad, where they started doing stuff that didn't make sense. Like Skull Merchant's dad started writing this really weird manga, which had a character design that really looked like her daughter in the future, and she took inspiration from it. But it could be interpreted that the entity kind of made her father mad to sort of set up little stepping stones for her to join the realm as the Skull Merchant. And for Spirit's dad, he started hearing whispers, and the entity can cause a lot of madness. So it might or might not be that the entity was trying to make her father crazy so he could become a killer and join the realm. But then he was like, "Oh wait, your daughter is kind of cooking here. Let's bring her instead."
I think that's one of my favorite killer lores. Just the idea that she was just so angry and so she just couldn't stand the audacity of her father.
No, I would be pissed too. I'd be like, "What the fuck?"
Spirit's definitely a good one. Also, conversely, this isn't a killer, but I think that Yoon Jin Lee is one of my favorite survivors, exclusively based on the fact that she was so pissed off about Trickster and everything he did that she walked into the entity's realm because she wanted to kick his ass. That is all she wanted. She didn't care. She was going right in.
Honestly, that's so
good.
based of her, especially for the fact that like for a lot of it, she was like, "I don't want to expose this because I want to keep my career and I don't want to go back to a life that sucked." But then after all, she was like, "Actually, no, fuck you. I'm coming for that ass," and just ran in.
Yeah. Kate's another one where she actually got away from the entity the first time.
Yeah,
I think that's pretty impressive.
It's
Exactly.
really fun when people have close encounters or they have an awkward relationship with like their real life, so that them getting pulled in is kind of not a relief, but like it's enough for them to stay alive. You know, if your life was so good outside of the trial, now you're in the worst position ever. You're not going to keep surviving. You're done. It's over. But if your
Or
life was like guilt-ridden and you weren't sure if it was going to collapse day to day, the entity's totally fine to pull you and give you a different life.
exactly like Elodie, for example, when she got took into the realm, she was literally dying. Like there were cultists coming after her. She was bleeding out. She was writing the sign for the entity to be summoned so she wouldn't die, and she got to live. So even if people get like a really nice life and then they get taken to Entity's realm, that sucks. There are some people who actually had their lives saved by the entity, even if it's with a fate worse than death. They did technically get their lives saved. So there's that, I guess.
Yeah, especially in that case when it was Elodie and Felix who knew what the entity was capable of because their parents disappeared,
Exactly.
following the same threads.
Also, something I wanted to add really quick before we move on to the next subject with killers is one fan theory which I really like and I hope one day gets confirmed or at least hinted at, which is the white eyes theory. Does anyone know what the white eyes theory is?
Like the killer's eyes turning white when oh yeah, I think I know what you mean.
If you
Well,
describe it, I'll probably recognize it, but
of
I
course.
can never remember
It's a
names.
Is
couple
it
of the original
good?
killer's designs. They have glowing white eyes, and in their lore, it lines up with them being wronged by specific people in their past that they either got revenge on or weren't able to get their revenge on. People who like hurt them in their childhood or caused them to have their life ruined later on. The implication being that once the entity pulls these people in who would otherwise not be evil, now they are in these trials hallucinating through these glowing eyes that the entity has given them this cursed vision of all the people that wronged them,
Exactly.
incentivizing them to go on that revenge spree that would cause them to hurt innocents in the process.
Exactly that.
Deathslinger, especially.
Slinger,
Exactly.
Wraith,
And spirit.
Spear.
It explains why characters like Rafe, who in the lore are really kind people and only do horrible things when they're pushed to their limits, are suddenly like killing Dwight or like killing Fung Min, and they're like, "Yeah, this is good. I want to kill you." And then before they're like, "I love adopting puppies. I love ice cream. I love helping the
Some
poor."
killers don't need such motivation, and that's what I like, where the entity will mold certain killers in a specific way to allow them to feed it. A killer that is reluctant in killing is no good. Whatever you can do to convince them to keep the blood and pain flowing, that's good.
And then you have Ghostface, who is
You have
the
Ghostface.
entity's fanboy.
Literally, he's just an asshole. And
In
then he's
in
like,
lore, his whole
"Yes!"
cloak flowing around is the entity specifically giving him panache. The entity
Literally.
really likes his cloak, so she
Tucking
lets
his
it
hood
flow.
behind his ear. Like, that was me.
I packed your
He's
lunch,
like, "Yes,
sweetheart.
son.
Get on the
Kill
bus.
them." Alrighty. It seems like Bryson is having some connective issues.
I think we could keep it rolling. If he gets back soon, he's back soon. We'll let him jump on in.
Exactly.
The
So I guess we'll keep
killers,
going
we are good on
on.
the killers. We love the killers in Dead by Daylight. So I want to
Yes.
hear more about it. As far as the lore goes, which killer do you think kind of shows off what the entity can like really do? Like if somebody is given like this perfect power that really complements their personality, I want to hear y'all's opinions, or somebody that the entity chose that you didn't expect and you really like.
I'm gonna say it. Legion.
Legion?
Legion. Because when you read the lore, they're like, okay, these kids are pretty fucked up. And then the entity's like, yo, you would make a great murderer. Come on, kids. Get in the van. And then their power is basically just them going on steroids and stabbing a bunch of people, and then maybe getting a big stab, and then the person falls over. And for some reason, the entity's like, you're also gonna get buffed. So Chris from Resident Evil, who can canonically punch boulders away, like huge boulders, cannot stop you. You are stronger than him. And I just think that really exemplifies the entity's power, where it can make someone as physically weak as a teenager being able to take on military vets with no problem, and they absolutely sweep the floor with them, which is the crazy thing too. Like, how is Susie, this 16-year-old girl who goes to like high school, beating up Rebecca, like, or not Rebecca, but Chris or Jill? Like, come on.
How is she throwing Jeff over her shoulder?
Exactly.
True.
How's Lisa, Hag, picking up anyone without breaking into 13 sticks?
Exactly. Made of sticks and bones and maybe a piece of flesh somewhere. I don't know where it is. And then she's carrying like people who would be like 200 plus pounds, like it's nothing.
I
Yeah.
do love it. It's when you're playing Pig and you just one-handed grab the Bill Overbeck, 2 seconds he's on your shoulder and you're running away.
Literally, like that's a whole ass man.
The entity wants you to scare people. The entity wants that fear to be palpable.
Considered me scared. Oh my god.
But the Legion's a good choice because they're willing. You know, all three of like the Legion, like Frank, his buddies, would do anything for him. It's a fun aspect when you kind of like convince such a malleable person to like keep doing what they were already doing. Frank did his job at grooming his friends into being murderous friends, going on a wild robbing spree and doing all the crazy stuff they wanted to do. And now that like they're given direction, it's dangerous. I like that.
Exactly.
Can I have my actually moment now?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
I'm actually pretty well read on the Legion.
Thank you.
Actually, it was Julie who was grooming Frank. In case you didn't know, she was one of those I write love letters to serial killers kind of gals. And Frank was a delinquent, obviously. He was messed up. He was probably into all sorts of like minor crimes. But Julie was the one who loved murder. And when they actually killed that first guy, it was at her sort of urging. She kept feeding into like the darker parts of him and encouraging it on because she wanted those serial killers that she was idolizing in her head. She wanted her
much better.
perfect romance.
Ooh.
So Frank killed the guy for her.
Girls
and
can't
then
have
they
hobbies anymore.
exactly. And then they all had their chance to be part of the crew, stick a knife in. But
That poor store clerk, man. He was just doing his job and then boom, 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 boom. 4 stab wounds. Like, I would not want to wake up. I would just go to bed. I would just be like, okay, this is death. Goodbye.
poor Susie, though, she didn't even want to do it. She was just there because
No.
she's a little baby lesbian.
Exactly. She was like, oh, my crush did it, so I guess I'm gonna do it now. Okay.
Exactly.
Been a bit of a federal crime.
Nah, what's the harm?
What's the harm? It's just girls can't do anything anymore, as Stevie said. Girls can't do anything.
Remember, kids, if you would rather go make out with girls instead of stab people, you can do this.
Yeah. Wait, actually, don't know.
Friends don't let friends stab other people. Get a good friend group, everyone.
Yes.
Say no
Alrighty.
to group murder.
No, do not group murder. Do not let your friends convince you to do group stabbings. Alrighty, so I guess we can move on to the next part that Bryson wanted to ask, which would be the trials themselves. What are they actually doing in these matches? So we're gonna let you, Stevie, answer first, and then we'll see
I
what
feel like I
Mike has
have
to say.
have a very loose understanding. I always considered it as sort of the digestion process, if that makes sense. There's like a mix of like how your stomach has like the mechanical process of smushing all the food around with muscles, and then it also has the acid that breaks down the food itself and moves it to the next part. I think that the entity itself is kind of breaking you down and pulling the nutrients out of your body and your mind, while also kind of tossing you and turning you and making you run to generator to door to hook to thing to add to this, to kind of heighten your senses, keep the adrenaline going. Your natural body will feed it kind of like a battery, and the trials themselves are kind of it plugging you in. It needs to feed, and now is its chance. It has you ready, and it will line everything up where you and 4 others are now sucked into this realm it's created. A realm is one of the maps, a realm is one of the campfire spots. It'll pull you in from wherever you currently are, which chamber you're in, or if you're already out of a trial, it'll pull you into another one. I think it's kind of just a loop. It's
Oh
like
God. Imagine going from like fixing the plague and getting all sick, literally throwing up, getting murdered by her, getting to the campfire for like a second, and immediately you see fucking Springtrap across from you at Larry's Memorial Institute. That would not just be my 13th reason, that would be my 26th, my 27th, my 28th. I delete myself. I go into the void straight away.
That's actually the people who are giving up on Hook.
You're right. Oh my god.
The next
BBD
time
boy.
Nia gives up on Hook, you know she just had a rough last match.
Oh my god, everything is canon. Everything is canon. Oh my god, I'm losing my mind.
No, 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 you weren't supposed to remember that child. Please stay, please stay.
Mind
Unity
wipe,
doesn't
mind wipe.
slide.
Oh, I
Bryson's
just want to say I'm
back.
back. I had some technical difficulties. So sorry about that.
Welcome back.
My computer was just like, no more recording or internet for you, so I had to move rooms, and I think
Tragic.
I was in a closet, so maybe it overheated, but I'm here now. Don't worry about going over what you all talked about. Just feel free to keep going. I know we left off on survivors, but I'm sure you guys have gone well past that.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, we're on the trial part now, and we were just talking about how some people are just going back to back in matches in the universe. Like, you get to the campfire 1 second, and then boom, you're in a new match. And then you're just like, oh, fucking come on. I want to eat.
Okay. Speaking of eating, I'm assuming survivors and killers don't have to eat. Is that accurate? Do we know anything?
No, I think.
I'd say
Okay.
blanket statement, no. Killers don't have to use the bathroom, eat, drink water, sleep. I think if they get the chance to do one of those things, they're lucky. Like, I think if you find a snack in the trial, go for it. I feel like if you're able to take a nap at the campfire, go for it.
Yeah.
I don't think it'll do you much good because, you know, your body and your mind as a survivor, as a killer, aren't really yours. I think that the trial is the only time you're kind of put back together, the only time that the entity really makes you who you are. I think everything in between is kind of it just keeping you on ice.
Speaking of trials, so we have modifier. I don't know if there's anything lore-wise regarding modifiers or 2v8, but I did want to touch on it a little bit. Is that something the lore? I know it's all somewhat kind of recent as well, so I don't know how how much lore has been created around that. Is there any lore reasons why these things
As
occur?
far as a modified trial might appear, yeah, I think some of them were given.
Some of them do, but most of them don't. Like Lights Out, Chaos Shuffle, 2v8, they don't really have a lore reason. Like there's fan theories. Like my personal favorite is that the entity just kind of mixes it up to like instill new fear to people. If the so-called memory wipe theory isn't canon anymore, or the memory wipe thing, which it probably isn't, as explained by Bun. So, yeah, the most logical reason why there's modifiers in lore is that the entity just wants to shake it up and put new emotion. Because after a while, you're going to get bored of Trapper hitting you for the 18th time on Larry's Memorial Institute.
Yeah.
The few events I think do have a lore explanation are obviously the Masquerade, which is all about Trix hosting a party and celebrating the entity's birthday, quote unquote. And the Halloween event, which is when the void kind of ripped open and then everyone was like, oh, it's hell. Yay.
I
Blue
do
hell.
think 2v8 is also canon because we did get that one big corkboard of Ghostface and
Oh, you're
all his
right.
notes on the other
Oh,
killers and the
right.
survivors and who he likes working with versus why is this guy so fucking fast?
That's right. I forgot. People were clamoring and loving that that Ghostface board. It was so funny. They put it together
was
I
so
just
well.
want more of that. I want more interactions between
I
characters
love
canonically.
it. I love it. It's canon now. Every killer has had a chance to maybe see another killer. Every survivor has probably met another survivor. They don't really talk, so who knows if anyone knows anybody's names, but they've seen each other. And I like that.
And that's a good point to kind of, I guess, transition to. But before we move into kind of like this deeper other stuff with like the Observer, the Void that we've mentioned and stuff. But it is insane to me, even in a DVD lore perspective, but also like just a reality, our world kind of perspective, that you can play as, I don't know, Alan Wake alongside Nicolas Cage and I don't know, Ellen Ripley and Leon Kennedy on I don't know, some on Hawkins
On Gideon
la-
Meat Plant.
yeah, like it's and King Kaneki is your killer. Like it is incredible what this world has become and what it will become, as we will see in the next many years to come. But it's just what they built here, the lore, the the characters, the chapters, like they're bangers after bangers, and it is incredible that if you like if when this game launched in 2016 and you said all these killers are going to be in the game, they ain't gonna believe you. They're like, no way. But it's just incredible that they are. It's awesome.
Yeah.
If
Also,
if I went back in time to the first moment that I like knew about Dead by Daylight, right? That like 2016 free weekend where it like showed up in my library and I said, "What's this game?" And then like I jump through the time portal and I see myself like 10 years ago. That would be a crazy moment. I mean, like first of all, I would probably say it's a cool game. You should play it. Nick Cage is going to be in there in 9 years. Also, you should be a woman. But that's beside the point. I'd make more use out of time travel than that. But Dead by Daylight would be crazy to say back then. Yeah, FNAF 3 is going to be in this game.
Incredible. Incredible.
also, you two talking about all the licenses together made me realize something I forgot to mention earlier. Is that the fact the entity pulls from multiple realities, not just one reality, multiple.
Yeah.
So it doesn't take like all the characters from the same universe. So like Raccoon City Police Department blowing up didn't happen in the same place that the Demogorgon ate people, because these are all from different worlds, and we can see this in stuff like cosmetics, the developers confirming it, little cheeky things and item descriptions and stuff. But for certain characters like Feng Min, who plays the Resident Evil video games, or had before she entered the trial, she must be shitting herself seeing Nemesis be real. For some people who watch characters, like, in Stranger Things, I think there's like a Halloween poster. They were watching it, they're like, he's so scary. Thankfully, that'll never happen in real life. And now Nancy's getting stabbed by Michael on Larry. Not Larry's,
my gosh.
Lambkin Lane.
That's crazy. I didn't think of
Nancy's
that.
getting stabbed by Michael while Ghostface fanboys in the background.
Exactly.
Oh my god, I love that movie.
Yeah, just incredible world they built. And the lore is just absolutely fascinating. But we have some kind of deeper connections and tissue here that we can dive into, such as the Observer, Vigo, and the Void. I'm sure all three of these subjects could be episodes on their own, so we'll just touch base on these just because these are significant in the lore from what I've come across in my research, and just kind of generally in what we mentioned in this episode already. So the Observer. Maddie, you mentioned this character last week. You think this might be a survivor in a future chapter that Behavior has been teasing it being really important. Tell us, who is the Observer?
Yeah, so the Observer, we don't really know a lot about him, but we do know a few things. Such as, for the longest time, he was the one in charge of the archives, and he was the one who narrated the multiple stories and looked at the memories of the characters in the fog. He comes from a world where a lot of the people are a lot more advanced than other worlds, so kind of think like high sci-fi. And they knew the entity, they knew to be afraid of it. And they had this group of people called the Council. We don't really know a whole lot about them, but they were very much afraid and were like, we need to stay away from it, but we also need to learn more about it just in case it tries to fuck with us. The Observer was like, no, I'm going to do my own thing. And he took a device called the Oris with him and went into the entity's realm. And the Oris is kind of like that weird like circle spinny thing of all the rings that you might have seen in the tomes, where it kind of allows him to peer into the fog and find memories of different killers and survivors and learn more about them. And the whole reason he's doing this, and the whole reason for the archives in the first place, was for him to try and find a weakness of the entity among these memories. And what's really interesting is that there's this whole library tower that he constructed in the entity's realm with the Oris as well. So his people were very powerful, and then one day in the lore, he's just kind of vanished. He's shown up a few more times, but he's been kind of wandering because in the lore of the past couple times, his tower was slowly crumbling away as he started to struggle, not finding a solution to beating the entity. And eventually he just started having to run because the entity got tired of fooling around with him, because the entity knew he was there. It could have killed him at any moment, but it decided to torture him instead for those emotion juices that I love so much.
And so has he been in trials before? Because I did read in some of his journals that he has been on hooks. He's mentioned he's been hunted by killers and been put on hooks. But do we have any idea why he's maybe not a playable character yet, or why he's not in the trials as of now?
I think the easiest way to explain it is that survivors in the trials, they don't have a way to get out, whether that be they can't, they have no way to, or they choose to be in there. For the observer, he has a way to get out with the auras, and
Okay.
also whatever magical doohickeys he may have from his world with the council.
Okay, very cool. Bun, Stevie, any? I mean, it's just he's fascinating. I've seen also. I think there's usually like cutscenes and stuff, or like the art cutscenes of him, and
Yes.
which he looks very cool. I love the beard. He would be an awesome character to play as. Definitely hope we see him in future lore bits and maybe even a playable survivor. But Bun, Stevie, do you guys have anything to add?
Not particularly. I know that Blight was in the lore and teased long before he was released.
Yes.
About a year and a half to 2 years before he was released, he was actually in the lore itself, like in the early tomes. And I can't remember exactly, but I think there was somebody in the lore that people associate with Vigo, or not Vigo. I think Vittorio. Sorry.
Gotcha.
V names hard. Yeah.
Lots of V's.
Lots of V's.
The Observer
They do
is
think that
really hard.
Vittorio was someone from the lore, but I can't remember who.
Because Vittorio's like Magic Man, so it makes sense for him to have, well-known reputation.
My Sheila.
As far as the Observer goes, he's very much just a mystery figure. He was just the background guy. You just saw him. He knew more than you, so come learn his secrets. I think that it's fun to have that character who's allowed to scout out the entity's realm, and the entity is toying with him. Like, he is not sure when his fortress will be entirely succumbed to the entity, and he doesn't know when he'll be taken. And I think that plays into us. We're like, this guy's gonna be a survivor, right? Right? And we don't know.
Please.
We
I want him to be a survivor so bad. I made him forever. Please.
and who knows if there's just killers and survivors and other humans roaming around the entity's realm, not in a trial. Do you just have this free-form experience where like your memories kind of mix together as the entity is trying to figure out its place for you? Do you even belong in a trial if you know what's happening?
And then we also have Vigo, which you all just mentioned. Vigo eventually becomes the Blight, correct?
No.
No.
Oh, they're different characters?
Vigo
They
is kind of
are.
only referenced in text, in items, in the
Yeah.
lore. We
People
don't
for a
have like
long
a picture
time-
of him. We don't have much of him.
Okay.
People for a long time thought that Vigo was the Blight,
Oh,
but
Vigo. Gotcha.
they were later confirmed that they were not the same character.
Oh, okay, very cool. And so this was a researcher who potentially escaped the fog, made several items in important parts of the realm. Potentially the hatch, not the entity created that, which is pretty damn cool. And created the salty lips jar offering.
And he also made a couple other offerings and items. Like there was a toolbox that he made. I think it's called like Vigo's toolbox. I could be wrong.
Okay.
There's Alex's toolbox.
Alex's toolbox.
But
yes.
however, there's Vigo's salty lips, which I
Oh.
don't know if those are still in the game. I think they still are.
I think they are,
Yes,
but
they
I've
are.
never seen them brought.
The implication being that like he's sort of like an occultist, an alchemical researcher, very similar to the Blight's character.
Little bit of a freak, honestly.
Okay.
Who isn't?
Come on, let your freak out. Let your freak out.
DVD is definitely freakish. And then we have the Void, where killers and survivors go when they give up, in air quotes. Basically, hell. Vigo escaped, Vigo escaped this using the Putrid Serum. And what is the Putrid Serum?
It's the stuff that Blight uses in the trials. For some
Blight
weird
juice.
reason. Oh, sorry.
No, I was just making a goof.
Oh, just to further explain that, the pustula flowers are these sort of like mounds and gross-looking orange stuff that happens around the time in Halloween, roughly once a year during the entity's realm, and it's kind of like acne for the entity, and basically using it gives you special properties, but you can also become quite addicted to it, and it can kind of twist you if you take too much or even a little bit. But somehow Viego was able to use it to get out of the void realm. So that's really interesting. So pretty weird, but also can make you a
Yeah.
druggie like the blight. So be careful.
Yep. Vigo and the Blade are very, very close foils to each other. One of them
Yes.
researching the entity's stuff to kind of help survivors, and the other researching the entity to for their own goals, to enhance killers, to be a killer themselves.
Yo.
Love to hear it. Oh, I love this. I want to jump in more, but I know we're at the hour mark, so we will end there. But before we kind of jump into the closings, does anyone have any closing thoughts, comments, remarks regarding DBD lore? I know for myself, this was entertaining. I know I missed some of the conversation, but just the bits we've had here and before that were fascinating. I'm super excited to jump into more like character specific lore. The Blight sounds very interesting, and so does the Void and Vigo. So, but Stevie, I'll jump to you first. What are your kind of closing thoughts?
It's exactly that. There's so much to dive into. We're gonna have hours more to go. Um, look forward to episodes on certain killers. Ask about. Please send us messages about your favorite side characters. If
Ooh,
you have a
yes.
character that's we didn't even talk about, please. We want to talk about them all. Eventually, we'll hit all the original killers, how they relate to lore. As soon as new killers come out, we're gonna pour over them. We're gonna be into this for a while, so it's good that we kind of got the baseline today.
Yeah, and hopefully we helped explain it to everyone really well, and everyone kind of learned something new.
Absolutely. Bun, Maddie, either of you have closing comments?
Not for me.
Okay.
All I'm gonna say is that the entity is a bit of a freak, and if we learned anything from Dead by Daylight, let your freak out.
Yeah, let it fly. Let it fly. Awesome. Well, thank you all so much. That is the end of episode 3. What is the lore of DBD? Hopefully, this gave you some insight into Dead by Daylight's lore. We're going to be diving more into it, character specifics, places, plots, etc. You can email us at redstainradio@gmail.com. Send us your questions, comments, ideas for future lore discussions. If there's a specific character you would like us to cover, tell us. Send us an email. And we would love to hear any feedback you'd have as well. In the meantime, share the podcast with a friend or family member. We'd greatly appreciate that. Thank you, Stevie. Thank you, Maddie. Thank you, Bun, and thank you all for listening. We'll see you in the fog next week, and have a wonderful week.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.
Thank y'all.